Hey, family, this is me. I know who I am, but maybe you may not know who I am. I'm Bishop John Soldiers, and I am here tonight with another offering of what we call relevant conversation, where we gather some of the leading voices, some of our leaders of faith and no faith, but conscious folk who are down for the effort of justice in all of the many different contexts that justice needs to happen. And can I just say a word about this justice thing? You know, justice ain't just out there, and we gonna, I want this stuff to be better. At times I want you to make it right, and I want that, but at the end of our work, we ought to be better for it, and not just me or not just you alone, but the entire community ought to be better, right? And so when we're out there crying no justice, no peace, what we're suggesting is that there is a way in which we've got to work together so that we all come a little bit closer to and let me use my Christian faith values, come a little bit closer to the glory of the kingdom of God here on earth, the reign of God on earth. Okay, I'm finished preaching. No, I'm not. I'm not finished preaching. I'm just finished with that particular sermon. Amen. I am so pleased and godly proud to have met somebody most recently in relationship to some of the work that's going on a couple of fronts. And let me say just a word. Over the last couple of weeks, we've had a couple of things to occur. It's not a new news that another black man is, gunned down. Another black or brown person has took a hit and took a loss, took an L for the cause of justice by authorized authority. And so there are a couple of fronts that this is now happening at, and one of those fronts is happening in Atlanta, Georgia. And this is the one you may not hear a whole lot about. We got a flash of it for a few seconds, and now our attentions, and rightly so, are in Memphis right now. That's the new front. But I heard about some of the work that's been going on for some time now in Atlanta, where a number of the segments of the work have come together and have begun to do some resistance work, some real true blue, this it's going to happen overnight. This is the work that goes on day for day, hour for hour, month after month, week after week, month after month. And two, to get some real movement and some real change happening and occurring for a community. And in this case, for the entire country. And we'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by that. But one of our friends and colleagues in the movement connected us, and I asked them if they would come on our show and talk a little bit about Atlanta. And you see me, Matttew, I'm struggling with them pronouns things. He is a millennial. I'm not, obviously. But we're gonna work it out. Can I get you to receive our friend and our colleague, freedom fighter, Minister Matttew Johnson, who is the interim executive director for the Beloved Commune. Interesting ministry that we're going to ask him a little bit about. But let me bring Matttew into this conversation. There you go.
Hello, Bishop. Thank you for having me.
Hey, I'm glad to have you, and have you greet our folk and greet the people who will see this live now, as well as who will be in the conversation in the coming days as they view this video, this cast. So Matttew, talk a little bit about your ministry. How do you come by it? How do you come to it? What is it, and what do y'all do?
Yes, there are a couple of different endeavors that I'm involved in right now. Beloved Commune was a brainchild of mine for a few years now. And what we're doing now is creating the capacity and the structures for especially activists and radicals to stay well. What often happens is that it's a war of attrition between the powers that be and those that will for the world to come. And what often happens is, given that the state seems to have unlimited resources, and many of us are doing this work out of the goodness of our heart, they tend to outrun us because the work never stops. However, we do have our finitude. So this structure was created in order to create and further wellness and a space for reconciliation among the wider activist community. Some of the things that we're especially focusing on as we're building this organization out this year, first and foremost, critical thinking. We had our first Ochoa forum this weekend, and Ochoa is an acronym that stands for Our Community Hears One Another, where we do deep dives on some of the most pressing issues. And then we create a space where first it starts with meditation and reflection. So we're entering into the space with some sense of care, wellness, and intentionality towards addressing one another in a way that's conducive to the world that we want to see. And then still working in a place where we can, question people's ideas and even scrutinize, criticize, and perhaps even agree. However, creating that forum where we are able to engage with one another in meaningful ways, even if we disagree, but still understanding one another's humanity and not seeing each other as discardable just because we disagree. Now, the second thing, and one of the projects that we're working towards now, are expanding our wellness programs. For instance, I'm training to be a yoga teacher now, as well as several other people that do work with us. And then the next thing is a model for self and social therapy so that we can care for one another. So essentially working on looking at externalized phenomena, right? And better analyzing it, looking deeper within ourselves with those skills, especially around critical thinking. And then once we remove the beam from our own eye, we can remove the mote from each other, right? And that's where the self and social therapy work comes in. But ultimately, one of the projects that we're going to have, which will essentially be the crux of our capital campaign, is having essentially an intentional community of Black organizers and activists where these programs are housed. All the things that I've said to you now, we can do anywhere. All we need is the knowledge. However, one thing that happens, especially among Black organizers and activists, is just because of the scarcity with us in comparison to our white counterparts is very real. So a lot of us have a lot less resources to be able to continue to do this work without just scrambling to make ends meet. So, what happens when we have essentially these basic needs met and we serve as an incubator to cultivate the ideas of our next generation of activists rather than them being co opted into organizations where they just end up working like dogs and they never get out their own dreams? Thank you for listening to my TED Talk. But that's the crux of the work that we're going to be building out over the next couple of years. I'm very excited about it.
I've done TED Talk, so like, you were doing pretty good there, sir. You're doing pretty good. So I was introduced to you by one of our colleagues and defenders and freedom fighter workers. Um, uh, as they asked me, had I heard about what was going on in Atlanta? And like,
Yes.
oh, okay, what part of Atlanta? Um, I am a Black person, so when you start talking about Black Mecca in the in the South, here in the United States, we got a couple of spots. Atlanta is one of those spots. So what part? And then they began to tell me, and I was like, I just heard a blip about it, and so they sent me a link. And then you said, would you be willing to be in conversation with somebody I've met on the ground and then talk more? And so you and I then connected. And so much like what happened during the Standing Rock moments that we had, that was happening a number of years ago, activists who were engaged in police accountability and police violence work, along with environmentalists, folk who were defending the forest folk, and folk who make a stand and really have done some good work around the work that we need to really continue to do around environmental justice, right? Or environmental injustice. Let's be clear. Teamed together, got together, and turned their attention into working in solidarity around and you can talk more, but the largest, as I understand it, the largest forest area in any of our major cities in the country. And listen, this is work that was started some months ago, and none of us knew anything about it, or very few of us. It didn't get a lot of press. Could you talk a little bit about what was going on and the beginnings of the movement work there in Atlanta around this effort?
Right. I think if I were to capture this in one sentence, here's what they came up with in Atlanta. In response to the largest protests in the history of the world that were against overt police brutality, the city of Atlanta responded by proposing to tear down the largest urban forest in the country and replace it with the largest militarized police training facility in the country, in the middle of a Black neighborhood that already suffers from flooding and poisoned water.
Okay. 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 You went so fast that quick. All right. So let's go. Could you go back a little bit? Say that one more again.
I hope I can. In response to the world's largest protests ever that were against racialized police brutality, the city of Atlanta responded by proposing to destroy the largest urban forest and replace it with the largest militarized police training facility in the country, in a Black neighborhood that already has issues with flooding as well as poisoned water.
What do you mean, sir? What do you mean? Be more specific.
I'm so glad that you asked. So, what happened in response to the largest protest against police brutality ever? What we saw was the proposal um, to build what we call Cop City. And Cop City is a militarized police training facility that will have a mock city where essentially the police will be practicing urban warfare tactics, as well as having a shooting range and a place to detonate bombs, uh, to essentially practice brutalizing its own population. This will be across a space called the South River Forest. That is the largest urban forest in the United States. Although Atlanta has the second largest average commute of any major city, only behind Los Angeles, one of the things that saves us is the tree canopy. The tree canopy is already in danger because of how quickly the space has been developed. Nevertheless, this is what we've come up with. And so this proposal was essentially done in the dead of night. The only reason that people found out about it is because we have a committed team of organizers and activists around Atlanta that were scouring information. This was passed through the mayor's office, foregoing the process of getting it approved by city council shortly before Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms announced that she would not be running for re-election. When folks got wind of this, there's been, and this was in the spring of 2021, there was immense pressure from all sides for folks that were really gunning to stop this. Folks wrote letters. Folks canvassed the neighborhoods. By the people that we spoke to and the numbers that we collected canvassing the neighborhoods surrounding the area, upwards of 97% of people were completely against it, especially because on the same street, you have a landfill, a juvenile detention center, and a detention center for incarcerated pregnant women. Needless to say, all of the other facilities that support the prison industrial complex, okay? And then in addition to that, there was going to be a furthering of militarized facilities where you have lead runoff that poisons the water. There were activists that found tear gas canisters on the property where they were essentially practicing chemical warfare even before any of this was announced. In a place where every time that it rains more than a tenth of an inch, the sewage system overflows and goes into the water supply of the South River. Now, this river system is also very important because the EPA's Clean Water Act mandates, and has mandated for decades, that the county of DeKalb clean up the water supply. However, there has been no ultimatum or deadlines to clean up the south portion of the South River in South DeKalb, where the 400,000 residents are upwards of 80% Black, right? About 75% Black, 80% people of color. Go figure. However, North DeKalb actually has a timeline that they have to follow. So in other words, there's no enforcement for cleaning up the Black water supply. However, the police seem to have very clear deadlines on when they'll build this facility to brutalize Black folks, right? So what we're seeing is an asymmetry of care quite clearly and instantiated in the law. In so many ways, where you're having environmental racism, police violence, degradation and destruction of a forest, where there is tons of wildlife. So you have the confluence of all of the major issues that people have been pushing back against, and really a dystopian society where we're constantly seeing these issues of global warming, climate change, police violence, and just economic inequity. Another thing to mention about the Black Mecca is Atlanta has the largest wealth disparity or racial wealth disparity of any major city. For every $1 in median household income for Black families, $3 for the white median household income. So this city runs on cheap Black labor. And there are so many ways that that's instantiated. Mind you, the police budget has ballooned over the years. For every dollar of the city of Atlanta's budget, 37.5 cents goes into policing. And that's not in addition to the money that Atlanta Police Foundation, which is essentially a police booster club, pumps into the police budget without any checks. For instance, they supported Operation Shield, which made Atlanta the most surveilled city in the country. And then in addition to that, they even gave police bribes. Well, excuse me, they gave the police bonuses in 2020 while you had widespread discontent. Now, I don't know where you come from, but corporations funneling money through another organization to give to public officials, where I come from, would be considered a bribe. But these are the ways in which corporations have acted with impunity while they protect their private interests at the expense of Atlanta's majority Black population, while people are being pushed out of their homes every day. Microsoft is bringing a 90-acre campus on Bankhead. How many jobs do you think that's going to go to people on Bankhead? So this is where we're at, and this is the context, and this is why folks are fighting so hard to stop this. Because, I mean, if all you invest in police, at what point do you actually create a safer society? I mean, crimes continue to rise while the police budget has risen. So this isn't like it's often presented that we are, illogical for pushing back against police funding. But, I mean, crime has continued to rise as they've increased more funding. And nobody ever proposes that when crime goes down, you've reduced police funding. So what we're seeing really is a paranoid reaction by people that have benefited from the wide disparities in wealth and the abuse of Atlanta's wider Black population. And that's why people are pushing so hard against this Cop City program, because we know what it's going to be used for, and it's not going to be keeping our people safe.
Yeah. So this is so can I just say, oh my gosh, wow. There are so many points here that you raised just in laying out what's happening, right? So first off, this urban green space, right? It's the largest forest space in an urban context in the country. 270 acres of land, right? The proposal, at least in one report I've read, that they would take about 100 acres of that, a little more than 100, a little less or more, 100 acres of that at a cost of about $90 million to build this cop city. And let me just say, my beloved Pamela and I had the opportunity several years ago to go to Brazil, to Rio, and outside of one of the favelas that we in fact got an invitation from the residents to visit, and to have them share their lives, their stories of how they exist. We went to a school that was right outside of that favela. The favela, for those of you who are not familiar with that term, it's a place where they have marginalized and ghettoized, let me say it that way, darker hued African ancestry peoples in Rio and in several other major cities in Brazil. And we were invited to a school that was right outside that favela on one side. On the other side was one of these cop cities where they trained, and in the Brazilian context, some of you all have heard Pamela and I talk about our Brazil trips. But in Brazil, like we got in Atlanta, you got the state troopers, you got the county, police force, and you got the city police force. That's in most of our urban centers here in the United States. You got a city, authorized authority, and you got a county authorized authority, and you got maybe, you got the state has an authorized authority. In Brazil, there are 20, 30, 40 different authorized authorities that are state sanctioned, that have guns, that they send to this cop city for training. And then they deploy those who come out of that training all over the country. They are embedded into the favelas and some of the other urban centers across Brazil. What you talking about? They're gonna try to do that here in the United States? Has Brazil come to the US? What?
Okay. I'll give you one better.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I'll give you one better. Let's make it a little bit more real. There is a program in Georgia called GILLY. That is the Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange. This is where officers from Atlanta and folks from the Israeli Defense Force train together in the same tactics. So the same tactics that are being used against Palestinians right now at the bloodshed in Palestine that we just had this weekend are being used right here.
Yes, and
I mean, it's so clear.
Yeah, let me just say, we saw this firsthand during the rebellion that went on in Ferguson, where Ferguson was talking directly to Gaza, and they were telling us how to handle the tear gas, and they to the degree they would say, pick up an empty canister, read the serial number. If it's FB57233, and they knew the serial numbers of the batches. All right. If it's that one, you use this part milk, this part water. If it's this one, you use milk of magnesia. I mean, to clear out the eyes, to help people recover from what occurred in their face and in their eyes and in their respiratory system. So we understand that weapons and all of those weapons, the tear gas, the rubber bullets, all of those were manufactured here in the United States, to which you had weapons used by United States sanctioned enforcement agencies against their own citizens. That's what you got there. That's what we're talking about here. Tactics that are used. We saw it again in Ferguson, and we saw it used in Baltimore when we were there, and of course in all of the other places in Minneapolis, in Milwaukee, and in some of these other places where there has been ongoing resistance work against state-sanctioned violence, police, and others. Tactics that are used in a global context, tactics that are used in Palestine by the Israeli government, and now we got this coming on. What they're doing down in Brazil is coming here to Cop City. So, folks, okay, all right. I know we're talking fast, and my blood pressure done got up a little bit. What is being perpetrated? And I think Brother Matttew had this just right. What's being perpetrated in the era of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. I mean, and the list can go on and on and on. Okay, it ain't got beyond me that Ahmaud Arbery and that incident happened in Georgia, not too far away from where you at. All right. In this Black Lives Matter moment, if y'all want to call it that, all right, it's not a moment, it's a movement, and well, I got lots to say about that. That we are talking about building, and if successful, the largest training center of its kind in this country. That's what we're talking about in the state. Oh, by the way, the School of the Americas is in Georgia. Oh. By the way, that where we train, And I found, interestingly enough, I found a statistic, and I, I don't want to believe this is true, but the document I read said that if Georgia was a state, not a state of the United States, but its own country, it houses the fourth largest prison population in the world. What's that? That's a present day legacy of the unfinished work that the enslavement period gifted us in this country. I would hasten to move on and say other things about that, but we're talking about building a police city, a cop city, where training will go on for state troopers, presumably city cops, city police force, and county police force, where they learn techniques. You said they found canisters, tear gas canisters already in this spot. Now, can you talk a little bit? Can you talk a little bit about the history of this spot? Who occupied this land before?
Well, this was initially Muskogee Creek lands. They called it Wilani, and that is a part of the renaming that we have reclaimed it as Wilani People's Park. They were forcibly removed from the land, needless to say. And then this land was a slave plantation. Now, after it was a slave plantation, codified in law, there was something called the Atlanta Prison Farm, where Black people were picked up for minor petty crimes, sometimes just being Black in public, and forced to work on this land without pay. So call that what you will. And they were made to produce food for the rest of the prison system in the Atlanta area. And just for a little bit of context, this place ran from at least early 1900s to the mid 1990s. During that time, such folks as Stokely Carmichael or Kwame Ture were imprisoned there for activism and held and forced to work. So this land has a lot of blood on its hands. And this past 30 years or so is the first time this land has been able to rest in centuries. And I think that's very important to note that this was laid out in Atlanta's Parks Master Plan in 2017 and laid out in the city's plans to be a public park. But that just flew away, like so many great plans in Atlanta for the profit of a few. And instead, we get what would be the largest militarized police training facility in the country, perhaps the world, that would be on the site of what was a prison farm in an area that is overwhelmingly Black with this history. I would call it tone deaf, but that would imply that our leaders are listening at all.
Yeah. So they're talking about building, folks. They're talking about building this training center with an auditorium, several auditoriums to house police and fire and public safety uses. They want to do a mock city. They want to build a mock city so that folk can train how to work in a burning building spot. You know, you got burning. They want to train people to do that. They want to train popo. They want to train the popo in urban policing. They want an emergency vehicle operator course. They want to offer in this place. This is what's being proposed for emergency vehicle operators. They want a canine training kennel. And for real, Is
Oh,
that
it gets so much worse. Because, I mean, for instance, like the burn tower is really cordoned off, would be a small part of it. We quite literally have a mock city to practice urban warfare that's equipped with a bar, school bus, schools where this would essentially be used for target practice and militarized drills. When it comes to the emergency vehicle, you have even a spot for a Black Hawk helicopter to land because, you know, that's something that a local police force needs, let alone their stable of tanks. There were, I believe, at least 20 Humvees that came out to the protest in support of Tyree Nichols just this weekend because, you know, obviously uh, the police don't have enough money when they have surplus military equipment. I just don't understand how they're making this argument that they need so much more when we're literally seeing tanks on the streets from the police. And I think it's quite clear who they plan to use those on. So, I mean, they're setting the scenes.
yeah, to practice urban warfare. That phrase,
Yeah.
boy, you woo. So let's okay. We could talk a whole lot more about that, but I want to. So folk on the ground there in Atlanta got wind of this and said, "Hey, this is wrong headed." And ultimately, as I understand it, about a year and a half ago, stuff started to get active around this. And ultimately, you've had folk who occupied this park in direct opposition to this proposed cop city. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, and let's be very clear. I think that this is always very important to note. Folks have tried every single form of recourse and been ignored at every turn when it comes to overwhelming public dissent against this project, when it comes to tons of letter writing, campaigns, public campaigns, canvassing, getting neighbors involved, etc. Now, the only thing, because, and now mind you, even before any type of adequate permits or approvals, there has been work that was being done on this land. The only thing that stopped it was direct action, right? This project is now months behind, and that's simply because of the occupation and acts of what would appear to be sabotage of equipment and projects and people really working, it seems, to be able to slow down the progress of this project in very real and meaningful ways. Uh, all the civil discourse was done, and there was absolutely no redress from our public officials. And it was the folks on the ground who have stopped this project from moving forward. Now, let me just make sure that we make this very real about where we're at right now and why this matters. Tyree Nichols was killed in Memphis. The police chief in Memphis worked for the Atlanta Police Department. Now, she was at one time fired from the Atlanta Police Department because there were two officers that came forward and said that she had stopped them from investigating a police sergeant's spouse for child pornography. She was also the head of the SWAT team and the Red Dog unit. The Red Dog unit was disbanded because of its immense use of force that actually killed a 92-year-old woman when they bursted into her house and had the wrong house. And it was, and oh yeah, and as a matter of fact, it was a few years after that until they actually disbanded. Now that I'm thinking about it, so there was widespread pushback against this unit throughout her tenure in Atlanta. Now, mind you, she was reinstated by the Civil Service Board, I believe, is the name of the entity. Despite being fired because of these issues. The person who shot Rayshard Brooks, Garrett Rolfe, he was also reinstated. the people that pulled um, AUC students out of their car and brutalized them, those officers were reinstated. So you have a history of there being no redress for brutality within Atlanta. Now, all these things being on this police officer's record, she was then promoted to be chief of police in Durham, then in Memphis. So what we're saying is this isn't bad apples. This person was institutionally advanced with this on her record.
Yeah, this assistance person.
And so don't convince me that this is some issue of 5 bad apples. Well, how many do you need it to be before you can finally say that it's all bad apples in the bag? How many rotten apples are you going to let stay in your batch before you say something about it and do something?
Yeah.
And that's where we're at now. Like, it's structurally corrupt.
Yeah. So we had there was an occupation of this park. Now, because this is all interconnected, folks. This is all interconnected.
I'm sorry, I went far afield, but this is important.
No,
I didn't want to.
No. Those connections. Yeah, those connections are absolutely essential to make. Occupation of this land with some wins. The occupation is slowing down the work. Questions are being asked. There's a redress beginning to stir. There's some momentum beginning to disturb. And as they do with all of these kinds of occupations, they send in the popo. All right, they send them in. They typically are heavily armed, way past armed than they should be. And there's always been a report that there are some weapons, and there's some weapons training afoot in these. That's the reason they have to go in and clean it up or shut it down. There's some public safety excuse that's used. And January 18th, a young person was assassinated, was killed. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because that's where I come in to hear this story. And get at least my attention gets turned to what's happening there. Could you talk a little bit about Manny and the sacrifice that they made?
That was our friend, also known as Tortuguita, Little Turtle. First and foremost, I'd just like to say, Tortuguita, we will not let your silly little tasks be in vain. Well, if I can take a couple of steps back, we knew that things were going to keep escalating because of the sweep that they did in mid-December, when people were forcibly taken out of trees, shut down with rubber bullets, pepper spray, and all other manner of chemical weapons, and then charged with domestic terrorism. At that point, we knew that they were literally just making things up. So that was an issue. And then another sweep happened where there were similar charges. Now, this one is so troubling because the narrative changed within 2 hours of the murder. First, they were saying that somebody had been shot after they ambushed the police and shot at the police. Within 2 hours, they then said that they approached this person in a tent. Now, I don't understand how somebody ambushes you as you approach them in a tent. These things already didn't add up. Now, with the things that they said that they collected, the items that they said that they collected at the tent, they had not included a gun. There are many accounts of Tortuguitas explicitly saying how damaging they thought it would be to bring a gun into the forest. Nevertheless, there was documentation that was provided maybe a week later of a gun that was registered in their name. And then and only then was it announced the type of gun that this state trooper was allegedly shot with. Okay. There's been no evidence produced. There's been no information about this state trooper or this incident. We have no idea of timeline. We don't know if Tortuguita could have been saved. We had no information, and it was blocked off for legal observers for us, so nobody could see anything. And now we're supposed to believe it. And to be frank with you, as violent as the police had been throughout this entire thing, I also won't be quick to condemn this person if they ended up having to act in self-defense, because what we have seen is continued violence from the police that has ratcheted up throughout time. So I'm not going to get into the game of whether this person was good or bad, and we just immediately condemn somebody if they use any type of weapon or force against the police when we see that the police use undue force, right? Like, what if Tyree Nichols had ducked or swung back? Does this make him a demon? Because this is what happens every time in the narrative. So either way, what we're saying is there are very questionable details even of the narrative that Tortuguita had a gun. And if they did, I'm still not sure if we should condemn them as wrong, especially with the asymmetry of force that we have continually seen in that forest.
Yeah, well, it's been reported that and there is documentation around this that they were committed to nonviolent resistance. They were there in fact, with the commitment that nonviolence was their chosen modality in this case. Defending the forest, as well as anti state-sanctioned violence. I mean, this is these narratives. They happen so often. They're overused tropes, right?
Right.
That get used over and over again against folk who are actually out there doing the work. They always want to demonize the one, the two, the three, right?
Yes, and my gut feeling, just to be clear, is that this is all an abject lie. However, I also understand that there are certain nuances, and when we have police, where we can make every excuse for them under the sun when they have specialized training to handle crisis situations for shooting people that are unarmed or in the back. I'm also saying that I cannot condemn people that may use force to defend themselves. I can't, because we've seen too many times where police have used and exerted force in ways that are completely unjustified. That's all.
So over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 months, there's been back and forth raids and incursions into the forest to stop the protests, the occupied protests of the forest, right? So that's been going on. We get now this latest where now a young person who was in that movement was killed.
Right.
We have the level of this work is ratcheting up, right? And then we get Tyree the following week, and what happened with him? He ain't had no weapon. He was a skateboarder. He was an artist. And the culture of violence, state sanctioned. Let me be very clear. State sanctioned. Popo all up in through all of this. The work that is ensuing both in Atlanta and now in Memphis and in many of our other urban cities. I certainly was a participant in my hometown during that year plus resistance effort in Ferguson. Here we are again after George Floyd, after the flourish of so many to be involved, to get out there and do the work of resistance movement building. Here we are again, folks. We're out there in the streets. I understand that they're attributing some of the property destruction that's happening in Atlanta to in response to Tyree Nichols's effort. They have others who are involved. We've lost our guest. We've lost our guest. Let me just keep talking. Hopefully they will get back on. We have the effort of many to connect the violence, what they call the so-called violence. I call it property destruction. Property destruction to me is not violence in the same kind of way, where human life has been lost. So anyway, that's a conversation for another day, where we can tease that out. My concern is, or the reason why I asked Brother Matttew to be with us. Brother Matttew, you there? I'm gonna just keep talking until you hopefully are able to get back on with us. Was to raise this story, to lift up this this front of the movement, to say that the work continues. The work continues in all kinds of ways. And what it was and is compelling for me is that there are a number of different groups that are working together. It is the defenders of the forest group, working with those who are on the ground doing police brutality work, who are connected with those who are interested in the environment. Brother Matttew is back. Amen. All right. This technology will, every now and then it'll just go the way, and you have to come on and get back in there with it. That's right. What I was saying, Brother Matttew, is that the way in which there is a very definite connection, and I feel like it's a similar kind of way. Solidarity worked when Standing Rock was happening. The call was made.
Yes.
The Native folk who were there to say, "Hey, this is happening, folks, and can't you see that there are obvious connections to something even more nefarious than just us out here, in the middle of, hardly nowhere, saying that the government is trying to do something against us." In fact, what's happening here is not just against us, and our few, but it's against all of us, right? This to have this top city get built and to have its purposes begin to be, both worked, but then it's sold and exploited all over this country, and in fact, the world has so much bad juju. Can I say it like that? And y'all don't be mad at me. This ain't right, y'all. Could you talk a little bit about what the work is right now? Where are you all that are there on the ground, and how of course the question is going to come: how can we help?
I'm so glad you asked. Well, as I said, generally these things become wars of attrition. We have had enormous bails set for folks, people that were at the last demonstration that were picked up arbitrarily and once again charged with domestic terrorism. I believe only 2 of the 6 people arrested received bond. That bond was about $350,000 each. So the folks that have generally worked to be able to provide bail for protesters are essentially being squeezed by our government so that we don't have the capacity to care for and support one another when we're arrested and put undue bond and financial strain on people to get free who have not been convicted of any crime. So that's one thing. If you can please donate, we need legal support and help. And to be quite frank with you, we need bodies and we need people to stand out. There are lots of preachers / politicians that would rather stay viable than stay aligned with God, or fight for a better world, which is what I thought the gospel was all about. But there are so many folks that have instead chosen to do what is politically expedient rather than speak truth to power. So what we need is people to be bold in action and start talking about a new world, right? Because if all you ever invest in is policing in your society, and you continue to have disparities in wealth, then you're creating the situation in which all you can do is use force to stop social ills. There are ways that are far more established. For instance, when I was working in Chicago, we found one of the most effective ways to curb criminality was providing jobs. And that could be at $12 an hour. That was more effective than investing in policing. We would spend over $30,000 to incarcerate people. Meanwhile, it would cost $10,000, or houseless people, $30,000 a year to incarcerate them. It would cost less than $11,000 a year to house them. Like, so we're just looking at how our, government has chosen to prioritize how we shape our society. So it's really about, if you have a platform, say something. If you can come to Atlanta and support, do it, because we need folks on the ground so they don't keep brutalizing the few and faithful. And also, if you have resources, please donate them. Please support if you have specialized knowledge on tactics or legal knowledge. We need all the help that we can get, especially if it's pro bono. And if there's any police out there and they send you after me, ignore the call or trip on your way. So just keep that in mind too. Wherever you are, there's probably something that you can do. And what we don't need is these folks to be building the Death Star in the middle of the Georgia woods right now.
Right.
When we have record disparity in wealth. Just last year, the top 1% earned $26 trillion in new wealth. The rest of everybody else earned $16 trillion. For the past 5 years, we've been setting record income disparity like we've never seen before. And before that, the only time that we had seen such disparities was immediately before the Great Depression. We're heading into something nasty. Money people know it. And instead of setting the world right, they're reinvesting on oppression. That's where we're at right now. Mark my words. This is recorded.
Yeah. So we have folk who are in the struggle, who are resisting nonviolently, protesting in an attempt to just try to level the playing field a little bit, in an attempt to bring some notice to what is obviously the furthering of violence in not only the community in and around Atlanta, and then of course in Georgia, but all over this country, funded not only by the state but by the friends, the police foundations and these other kinds of foundations. It's funny to me, about once every quarter, I get a call from some version of one of these foundations. They know me by name, and they call me by my title, and they ask me, we know you are a friend to the police. I find it just interesting that they get my name, and I've probably been one of the few here in Connecticut. Well, I'm a part of a group of us who have been consistently calling out the police for their violent behaviors and the ways in which authorized authority in state-sanctioned violence is not what I would like to see in the communities that I live, work in, and so it's quite interesting to me that here we are yet again. We have some bodies and folk we got to bury, and the struggle continues. Where the issues that are related to this struggle seem to continuously get. I mean, this put in a name and a family, and the playbook is on. We're seeing it right now. We're seeing the playbook, the playbook right now in operation, and yet, outside of the moment and the cameras, the movements are afoot. The monies are being poured into these projects, like you named in this project. They didn't go through the regular processes. They give you a little front facing of this project, but behind the scenes, they're working this thing. All of a sudden we got cameras everywhere. They can follow you from the time you hit one part of the town, the city you live in, all the way across to the other side of town. Ain't nobody said nothing. Ain't nobody said nothing. Here in Hartford, we have the company that built the system of surveillance is a company whose support comes out of Palestine. Actually, is an Israeli government supported company. So I'm telling you what I know. You named the budget in Atlanta, here in Hartford, Bridgeport, and New Haven, our top cities here in the state of Connecticut. Between the police department and the school board, they're the two highest line items in the cities, all of those cities' budget. The police first, and then public education second. It's uncanny how this is the playbook again. This is how we roll. And the question I ask any of you, is this right? Is this what we want? Is this the kind of society we want to live in? And I say no to it. This didn't drop out of heaven. This didn't drop out of heaven. We created this. And I say we, and I'm using the we loosely because I wasn't in it on it. I'm too dark. I wasn't in on it at all. But I can tell you this, that didn't come out of heaven. That was built can be unbuilt. That which is constructed can be deconstructed. And we can reconstruct something that makes sense, something that we, all of us together, for the benefit of the many of us together, we can say yes to. We are out of time. Brother Matttew, can I ask you, from time to time, I want to know words, can we get words from the front of report ever so often from you about what the work is and what's happening down there in Atlanta? And our prayers are for you. And what I'll do is I'll get information from you as to how folk here can get involved, can support your efforts and your work. Thank you again for being on our conversation tonight. And if you want more information, you check out our website, More Monday CT. We'll have stuff on our social media pages, and we're following this story. We're praying for the work that you all are engaged in, involved in down there. Our prayers go out to Manny and their family, and the entire activist community there that's in grief and mourning of the loss. And of course, I say that by extension, we offer that same prayerful support to Tyree and his mom and dad and that community and family in Memphis. We've got to do better, folks. And I'm one of the voices. Matttew is one of the voices that said we're gonna do better, and we're gonna stay on the line doing that which we do, asking for this community, our community and our society to do a better job, not just to do a better job. Stop shooting and killing people in the name of progress. This ain't no progress. This ain't the progress I want to see in the world. This ain't the progress. Thank you again for being with us tonight, for beginning this conversation, and stay tuned. We're gonna continue talking like this and sharing these kinds of stories in the coming days. God bless. We'll see you next time. Peace.